Human beings are built for connection. From the moment we're born, our brains depend on other people, on faces, voices, and touch. Every glance, every conversation, every small moment of contact wires us to feel secure in the world. But what happens when all of that disappears? What happens to your brain when you're completely alone? Imagine silence. Not just quiet, but the absence of human presence. No notifications, no voices, no one to share a glance with. At first, there's peace. The noise of the outside world fades, and you can finally hear your own thoughts. But as time stretches, something subtle begins to change inside your mind. The human brain, deprived of social connection, starts to behave differently, and not always in ways you'd expect. When scientists study isolation, they often look to extreme environments: astronauts in space, explorers in the Arctic, prisoners in solitary confinement, or volunteers sealed in dark rooms for weeks. What they find is both fascinating and unsettling. The brain doesn't simply rest when it's alone. It reacts. It adapts. It rewires itself to survive in a world without others. In these moments of complete solitude, your brain's chemistry begins to shift. The reward system, which normally lights up during social interactions, goes quiet. Levels of dopamine, the neurotransmitter that gives you motivation and pleasure, begin to fall. Without the small social rewards that come from smiles, laughter, and shared experiences, your sense of purpose can blur. At the same time, cortisol, the stress hormone, can begin to rise. It's as if your brain starts to interpret isolation as a kind of threat, a sign that something is wrong in your environment. Deep in the limbic system, the amygdala, the emotional center of the brain, becomes more active. Its job is to detect danger and keep you alert, but without the grounding presence of other people, it can become overactive. That's why people in isolation often describe feeling uneasy or hyper-aware of their surroundings. A small sound feels louder. A shadow seems darker. The brain, deprived of external feedback, begins to create its own tension. But the changes go deeper. In long periods of solitude, activity in the prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for decision-making and rational thought, can slow down. Your ability to plan, focus, or even remember details can fade slightly. Time starts to lose structure. Days blend together. Without external cues from others, without conversation, light shifts, or social routines, your sense of time can drift, almost like floating in a dream. One of the most profound effects of isolation is the way it alters self-perception. Our sense of who we are is constantly shaped by the people around us. When you talk, joke, or share an experience, your identity is mirrored back to you through others' reactions. Remove those mirrors, and you start to lose definition. You become your only point of reference. Thoughts loop. Memories replay. The boundaries between imagination and reality can blur. People who've spent long stretches completely alone often describe strange phenomena. Some hear faint voices or footsteps that aren't there. Others feel detached from their own bodies, as if observing themselves from a distance. It's not madness. It's the brain trying to fill the silence. The auditory and visual cortices are so used to processing constant social input that, when deprived, they begin to generate it internally. The mind starts to create its own company. Experiments in sensory deprivation tanks reveal this vividly. Within minutes of total silence and darkness, the brain begins to invent sensations, flashes of light, whispers, or phantom touches. Isolation, it seems, doesn't quiet the mind. It amplifies it. When you remove the outside world, the inner world begins to roar. And yet, solitude isn't always destructive. When chosen intentionally, being alone can have the opposite effect. Instead of falling into chaos, the brain can find clarity. Neuroscientists call this the activation of the default mode network, a set of brain regions that light up when you're not focused on external tasks. It's the system responsible for reflection, imagination, and self-discovery. When you daydream, meditate, or think deeply, you're using it. In solitude, this network can thrive. Throughout history, great thinkers, artists, and philosophers have sought solitude for this very reason. When you strip away the noise of constant interaction, you create space for original thought. Alone, the mind turns inward, exploring ideas that would never surface in a crowded room. In isolation, the brain can connect distant concepts, make creative leaps, and even experience moments of transcendence. This is why solitude can feel both terrifying and beautiful. It's a confrontation with yourself, with every thought, memory, and emotion that usually hides behind distraction. But there's a fragile balance. Solitude can nourish the mind, but prolonged loneliness can damage it. The key difference lies in perception. When you choose to be alone, your brain interprets that as control. It releases calming chemicals, like serotonin, that support focus and peace. But when you feel forced into isolation, your brain reads it as social rejection and activates the same pain circuits triggered by physical injury. Loneliness, quite literally, hurts. Modern life makes this tension even sharper. We've never been more connected, yet people report feeling more isolated than ever before. Digital contact gives the illusion of connection, but it rarely satisfies the brain's deep need for real human presence, for the subtle cues of body language, eye contact, and shared silence. It's those small moments that keep the brain anchored in reality. When scientists study people who live in complete solitude for extended periods, such as hermits, monks, or researchers stationed in Antarctica, they find patterns of adaptation. At first, there's a spike in anxiety and restlessness. But over time, if the person learns to accept the isolation, the brain adjusts. New rhythms form. Sleep patterns may change. Creativity can increase. The person begins to enter a quieter, more self-contained state of awareness. This adaptation is a kind of neural resilience. The brain is plastic. It changes in response to experience. When faced with isolation, it can build new pathways for self-regulation. Meditation, journaling, or even talking to oneself are ways the brain creates feedback loops in the absence of others. It's the mind's way of maintaining balance, of reminding itself that it still exists. But not everyone can adapt so easily. For many, prolonged solitude leads to emotional decline. Depression, anxiety, and cognitive fog can emerge. The brain's reward system weakens, making even small pleasures feel dull. Over time, social withdrawal can become self-reinforcing. The longer you stay alone, the harder it feels to rejoin the world. The brain, once hungry for connection, can grow numb to it. One of the most striking studies on isolation comes from research on prisoners kept in solitary confinement. After just a few days, many experience confusion, hallucinations, and intense emotional distress. Their brains, deprived of social stimulation, show reduced activity in regions associated with empathy and communication. In extreme cases, isolation can even alter gene expression related to stress and immunity. It doesn't just affect the mind, it affects the body too. But this isn't just a story about prisons or polar stations. Even in ordinary life, small doses of isolation can shape us. During quiet nights when your phone is off, when the room feels still and your thoughts start to echo, your brain goes through subtle shifts. It starts to scan for connection. It may replay memories of voices or faces. It may dive deeper into introspection. These moments, though fleeting, are reminders of how deeply social the human mind is. What's fascinating is how quickly the brain recovers once connection is restored. A simple conversation, a shared laugh, even eye contact can flood the system with dopamine and oxytocin, restoring emotional balance. Social interaction acts like a neural reset. It reminds the brain that it's part of something larger, a network of other minds, all wired to respond and reflect. Still, there's a kind of beauty in temporary solitude. When you strip away the noise of constant input, you meet yourself more clearly. You notice the patterns of your thoughts. You hear the tone of your own mind. Solitude can be a mirror, not the social mirror of others, but an inner one. And in that reflection, you can see the parts of yourself that usually stay hidden, your fears, your hopes, your untold stories. To be completely alone is to experience both vulnerability and power. You become aware of your mind as a living system, pulsing, imagining, remembering. You realize how dependent it is on connection, but also how vast it is on its own. The brain in isolation doesn't die, it dreams. It builds worlds out of memory and imagination, reaching for something beyond itself. Psychologists often say that solitude, when balanced, is essential for mental health. It's the space where integration happens, where your experiences, emotions, and memories settle into understanding. Without solitude, you can lose touch with your inner voice. Without connection, you lose touch with the world. The healthiest minds learn to move between both, periods of deep introspection, followed by connection and exchange. So what happens to your brain when you're completely alone? It depends on how you enter that silence. If you resist it, it can feel like suffocation. If you embrace it, it can become transformation. The same isolation that causes anxiety in one person can bring clarity to another. The difference lies in whether you perceive solitude as emptiness or as space. In the end, being alone forces the mind to face itself, to listen, to observe, to adapt. It can strip away the illusions we build through social performance and reveal what's real underneath. Alone, the brain confronts its most fundamental truth, that consciousness itself is both connection and separation, awareness reaching into the void and waiting for an echo. The next time you find yourself completely alone, pay attention to what rises inside you. The silence is not empty. It's your mind unfolding. It's your neurons searching for meaning. It's your inner universe expanding in the absence of others. And maybe, in that stillness, you'll realize something remarkable. Being alone isn't the opposite of being connected. It's a different kind of connection, one that begins within.